Doctors of Reddit. What patient made you go, how the f*** are you even alive? Belligerent guy comes in a wheelchair. He doesn't want to be here. He's f***ing fine. The party was good. EMS f***ed his evening up. EMS brought him in from a bush party. The guy had a chainsaw stuck in his thigh and shin. Literally jammed in his leg. And severe burns after falling into the bonfire on half his body. Guy was hammered. Didn't seem bothered by the fact he was severely burned or had a chainsaw in his leg. He ended up losing the leg below his knee. And got a nasty infection from the burn. But still, if his leg wasn't completely f***ed, I am convinced he'd have gotten up and tried to fight people. I was on home call for ER in a small town. Got a call from the ER nurse one night and she was like, EMS brought someone in here and they think she might be dead. I was like, is she? She was like, I don't know. This was a seasoned RN, by the way. So I was like, well, guess we're treating this as a code blue kind of situation. So without any further information, I jump into my car and rush over to the hospital. Once I got there, I realized why the triage nurse was so confused. In the trauma bay lay what appeared to be skeletonized remains under a blanket. The person felt warm to touch. So I opened their eye. And a yellow, wrinkled, shrunken eyeball stared at me and then suddenly moved. Potassium of 1. For those familiar with lab values, the backstory was extreme self-neglect / depression combined with caregiver neglect. Weighed in at 67 pounds at a height of about 5 feet 5 inches. We actually resuscitated her. Very aggressively. And unbelievably. After about 8 liters of fluid. She started speaking a word or two at a time and recognized her daughter. For those like me who are curious. Potassium levels of 3.6 to 5.2 is normal. Anything less than 2.5 is life-threatening. Seems like a relatively wide range for normal. But it doesn't take much to get into deadly territory. That's kind of scary. I'm going to go eat a banana. I had to have 4 bags of potassium pumped into my veins once in resus. Was the most painful thing I can remember. They tied my hands down to stop me pulling the 4 tubes out. They also kept trying to get me to drink it. It's gross. I was about to comment the same thing before I saw yours. Holy speep. One time I was getting potassium pumped into me and the nurse had left the room. The pain was getting worse and worse by the second and my call button was out of reach. I was crying and on the verge of screaming and ripping my 4 out when the nurse came back. It feels like fire is being pumped into your veins. Wow, why and what did you need it for? What is a common reason people would need it in 4 form? Sounds so awful. It's a critical mineral for muscle contraction and nerve conduction. The biggest concern if your potassium is way out of whack is that you develop cardiac arrhythmia because the cardiac muscle is not conducting electricity or contracting properly. So eventually you have cardiac arrest. All makes sense. Is there such thing as too much potassium? What would the reverse be? If it's possible? Yes. You can also have too much. Usually happens in people with really advanced kidney disease. If they don't pay attention to their diet. I have a hospice patient that has been on our service for 4 years. I'm either really great at hospice. Or really bad at it. My great-grandma went to hospice because she was no longer ambulatory. Needed help using the restroom. Losing weight. Etc. A month in, her nurse comes in to find her in the restroom on her own steam. This was paired with a marked weight gain. Turns out the nursing home food was speep, so she just wasn't eating enough. But the hospice facility let her have salty buttery pierogi and kielbasa again. So she started eating. Shakes head that health food speep will kill you. Man. J/K. But I do opine that processed healthy food is neither. I worked at a nursing home kitchen in college. The general consensus among those who still had their wits about them was "Beep my doctor. I want to drown in a sea of bacon fat." I mean, if you're at the point in your life where you need to be surrounded by medical staff to keep you going proper due to age, beep it. Eat what you want. When you want. Die happy and fat. Hella old people suck at gaining weight too. Give grandma her tortillas and queso. Don't be stingy either. My father's doctor couldn't believe A, he didn't need to amputate his feet, and B, he was still alive. Dad had brittle diabetes. His pancreas would kick in and out due to a congenital deformity. At 82, he had significant heart issues, including angina, enlarged heart and clogged arteries. One day, his feet went black. Not just bluish or gray. Black as charcoal. Rushed to emergency. We were told they would amputate. But to say our goodbyes, Dad refused surgery. Said he'd rather be dead. At his age. Hours later, his feet were pink. We took him home that morning. Doctor actually apologized for upsetting us, but said he'd never seen anything like it. Wow. The dude just straight up refused to die, and his body was like, "Alright. Geez. You win." Queen Elizabeth has a challenger. Veterinarian. Dog hit by a train. It severed the dog's leg and the dog carried its own leg home. Owner brought dog and leg to the ER. Edit. Leg could not be reattached due to significant damage to limb. Dogs do great as tripods though. That dog must have been crazy from pain. That's amazing. Did it survive? I'm assuming that the leg wasn't reattached and now there's a three-legged dog being absolutely doted on somewhere in the world. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. Patient here. When I was 2, I was being treated for asthma due to wheezing, labored breathing, etc. One night it got exceptionally bad, so my mom took me to the ER. They put me face down to do a CT scan. This was 1990, and when they were done, they turned me back over and I was blue. Had stopped breathing. CT revealed a volleyball-size mass in my chest. Emergency surgery revealed what was supposed to be my twin. It kept growing inside my rib cage and finally had nowhere to go in my toddler body, so it cut off my airway. It had fingernails, hair, appendages, everything but major organs. I made a full recovery. I am a healthy 31-year-old now. Zero asthma. Only remnant of that night is a scar that goes from the center of my chest to the center of my back. Update. Definitely didn't expect this to blow up. Damn. Thanks for my first gold. This was a teratoma. So it was never a viable human. Edited the post to show that I am the healthy 31-year-old. LOL. Anybody that quoted Dwight Schrute is my hero. What? The beep. Yep. It's called fetus infetu, alternatively known as fetfetuses. I had a patient who was literally cut in half at the pelvis after a car hit him and pinned him to a telephone pole. Paramedics carried his legs in separately. He was wide awake and talking to me as we quickly put in a central line, and he got all the bleeders ligated by like 5 different surgeons. He declined pain meds repeatedly. What a legend. He was in the OR 5 minutes later. Luckily this was at a major academic center with an exceptional trauma surgery team. Apparently the guy lived. Not sure what his quality of life was after. But pretty crazy. currently in residency. But this was a patient I saw in medical school. This one has more to do with the patient's past medical history instead of anything acute. Had one patient in one of my internal medicine rotations who was admitted for hip surgery, who was one of the nicest, sweetest people I've ever met. Her surgery was pretty routine and there were no complications. In her past medical history, she was diagnosed with stage 4 endometrial cancer that had spread to her brain. Apparently she had undergone chemo, radiation, primary tumor resection, and surgery to remove the brain met. She remained cancer-free since that period. The fact that she had undergone that whole ordeal and appeared to be mostly healthy and was in remission from her cancer really blew my mind. During residency, my ICU patient had to have his chest reopened less than an hour after 6-hour open heart CABG surgery. He needed 12 units of blood. His heart massaged then shocked 4 times. Cardiothoracic surgeon in the ICU operating because no time to go back down to OR. Was an illicit drug abuser and alcoholic. Nurses called him the cockroach. I checked in on him for 4 weeks. He was unresponsive every day. On week 20 we had to consult ENT to take maggots out of his nose. I was sure he was a goner after that. Week 3 passed. No change. Week 4. Day 24 I believe. At 6 a.m. he opens his eyes. I was shocked. He has a permanent tracheostomy now, but somehow is alive. How the hell did he get maggots in his nose? Edit. Wow, I really didn't expect this many comments and upvotes. Thank you everyone. I was curious as to why the fly eggs or the small maggots weren't picked up. Surely a nurse cleaning his face at least daily would have noticed them. Unless some poor fly literally crawled all the way up there or noticed some small ones at some point cause they start out small. I'm not that poster, but I'd assume drug abuse. I shadowed an SLP in an ICU one day and we had to do a cognition eval on someone who had overdosed on what his chart called a variety of drugs. I forget exactly how I found this out. I think he was alert and told us. But he'd done so much cocaine that he didn't really have a soft palate anymore. It had just dissolved away or something. I'm really not acquainted enough with drugs to say for sure. Edit. Remembered it wasn't a cog eval. He had been intubated and we were doing a speech/swallowing screen. Edit 2. People are asking how this means maggots. I can only assume that perhaps when he was asleep or passed out one time a fly either flew in or smelled the dead tissue, and figured its children would love to eat that. You'd have to ask the top commenter to be sure, though. Yeah, insufflation of caustic drugs is pretty terrible for your nose over time. Even short-term chronic use of something snortable like coke or meth can beep up the soft tissue inside your nostrils pretty badly. I've heard it's fairly common for coke addicts to have holes in the cartilage inside their nose. A couple pictures of me before and after brain surgeries were on the front page around this time last year. The mortality rate for acute subdural hematomas is 50 to 90%. Of those who live, approximately 20 to 30% regain any brain functioning. Due to the subdural hematoma, the bleeding in my skull was so severe that I also had cranial herniation. My brain tilted 5 millimeters, causing my brain stem to compress into my spinal cord. That I not only lived, but woke up, and recovered well enough to go back to work/get married/travel the world/return to baseline physically is a straight-up medical miracle. I'm still in touch with the neurosurgeon who was on call at the hospital that day, and he says the same thing. Wow. I went back through your posts and I'm all choked up. That's amazing. I'm sorry you had to endure something so horrible, but so thankful you could overcome it. Congratulations on your recovery and marriage. I hope things will continue to be positive. Lady in her mid-30s was in the clinic for a 1-week follow-up post-foot amputation diabetes. She was admitted straight from the clinic because her blood glucose was 600 mg/dl, normal is 80 to 120, and the wound was severely infected. We used super concentrated doses of insulin to bring it back to the 200s. She was on strict diet restrictions and we couldn't figure out how it wouldn't drop any lower than 250. Turns out her kids' teens had been sneaking giant 64 ounces sodas and candy bars into the hospital. Literally 1 week after we chopped her foot off because of uncontrolled diabetes. Not exactly a case of how the f*** did you survive that trauma/disease, but how the f*** do you even function on your own? I know a guy who keeps telling me that he never takes insulin and drinks 40 ounces of dew a day and his diabetes hasn't caused him any problems yet. Same guy also had his foot amputated a few inches above the ankle a year ago. I don't understand. Does he think the amputation was for frostbite? Termites. Pesky buggers. I work in trauma and once had a guy fall off a roof. He said he remembered hitting the bars on the scaffolding on the way down. We originally thought he'd fractured his femur, but nope, just a small hematoma. He was in bed next to a man who had broken his ribs and had a small C-spine fracture when he fell forward picking up his keys. A friend of mine had to get his entire leg amputated because he slipped off the bottom step of a ladder and bent his knee backwards. It apparently pinched some type of main blood vessel, as his entire leg eventually got necrosis when they had him in the hospital. They tried to helicopter him to some other hospital, but there were high winds. So they had him sitting there with the necrosis spreading. Over a stupid 1-foot slip. Edit. To basically answer everyone's question. It just happened 3 weeks ago. I visit him and we both kinda look where his leg used to be and just think, what the f***? He is taking it pretty well, but we kinda nervous laugh at how bizarre it was. I was right next to him and his knee didn't even bend back that far. No broken bone or anything. But he was in pain, so I forced him to the hospital when all he wanted to do was ice it. It's crazy how strong but delicate the body is at the same time. He's a physical therapist and was always in top health. He was the exact weight he should have been. While he was in surgery, the doctors told his family that he had the possibility of not making it. When they called me, I couldn't comprehend how on earth that could be possible. Then they said he would live, but the entire leg had to go. But like I said, he is taking it fairly well. Another thing to stress about. Awesome. EMT here. Brought in a PT whose now former girlfriend stabbed him in the face with a chef's knife. The knife went through his right eye, missed his cranial cavity, and stopped about a mm from his brainstem. The X-ray was nuts. We showed everyone. Good morning, Mr. Smith. I'd like to show you this X-ray. I didn't get an X-ray, doc. I know. But look at this. It's f***ing nuts. Guy got stabbed in the face and lived. Currently a med student. But was formerly an ER nurse. While working as a nurse, I had this one patient who was originally from the Congo complaining of right lower abdominal pain, with a subsequent diagnosis of appendicitis. Nothing crazy about that. See it every day. The crazy part was the story he told me next. He said that he didn't think it could be appendicitis. And when I asked him why, he told me this. When he was in the Congo, he was out in the bush trying to poach gorillas. Awful. I know. When he developed right lower abdominal pain, nausea, fever, etc. Being out in the bush, far from medical attention, he and his buddy decided the best course of action was to cut open his abdomen with a machete and remove his own f***ing appendix. After nearly dying from the surgery, He then went on to nearly die from sepsis over the next several weeks. I assume he was under medical care by this point. Somehow, he manages to overcome nearly impossible odds and survives, and years later immigrated to Canada where he develops appendicitis again. So after hearing this, I was equally amazed as well as skeptical. But he showed me his scar, which I thought was fairly validating. I told his surgeon the story and asked why would he still get appendicitis. And they said he most likely just didn't remove the whole thing. I know this is all hearsay, and it is definitely possible it was exaggerated or even entirely fabricated by the patient. But if it's true, it's one of the most badass things I've ever heard and definitely belongs here. As a med student on my emergency rotation, I had a guy brought in who had fallen off a 7th or 8th floor balcony and landed on his head. Essentially DOA, and we couldn't get a blood pressure when he got to the hospital. As a student, my job was to basically stand to the side and squeeze the bajillion bags of blood that went into this dude. His cervical spine was essentially dust on the initial CT scan we got. I figured he probably wouldn't have made it, but about a month later I'm now on my ICU rotation and I see this guy awake and conscious. Pretty crazy. Any update on his condition? Crazy. When I saw him, we were basically seeing how much function he would get back, but he was going to be in the ICU for a long time. From what I can remember, he couldn't really move either leg, but he actually had some movement in his arms/hands, so they weren't sure how much he was going to get back by the time he left the hospital. That's insane nonetheless.